steel screamed first, then the baby. Noel pressed his forehead against the window, feeling the glass vibrate as the train plunged into the tunnel. The pressure changed, sudden, crushing, like invisible hands squeezing his chest. He focused on the coldness against his skin. Real, solid, not the sound carving through the cabin air. The crying wasn't just noise. It was a physical thing. It filled every corner, made the recycled air thick and hard to breathe. Around him, passengers shifted in their seats. Small movements, uncomfortable, pretending they didn't hear it. He'd been placed in this seat. Row 9, window side. A ticket handed to him at the platform with quiet instructions he hadn't questioned. Questioning got you noticed. Being noticed got you evaluated. And Noel had been evaluated before. The train rattled deeper into darkness. His heartbeat synced with the rhythm of the wheels. Steady, mechanical, predictable. The baby's crying synced with nothing. It rose and fell like something breaking over and over, and Noel felt his shoulders tensing against instincts he'd spent 3 years training into silence. Don't look. Don't offer. Don't make yourself matter to problems that aren't yours. Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. 3 men sat 4 rows ahead. He'd counted them when he boarded, not from curiosity, but because counting was survival. Details kept you safe when awareness was the only defense you had. They wore suits too expensive for a weekday commuter train, sat too still for regular passengers. One of them held the baby with the stiff, careful distance of someone holding evidence instead of a child. The cabin smelled like burned coffee and fear nobody wanted to name. A woman 2 rows up angled her phone screen away from him, not from guilt, just habit. Privacy was reflex now, so was watching. Noel pulled his messenger bag closer. Inside, a lunch he'd packed that morning, a book he wouldn't read, and settlement papers from 3 months ago. Rejection, legally mutual, emotionally accurate, financially adequate enough to keep him quiet. You're too aware, his former pack had said during the last meeting. It makes people uncomfortable. They'd meant he noticed when the numbers didn't match, when smiles contradicted the tension in someone's jaw, when contracts had clauses that undermined everything promised in the first paragraph. The baby screamed louder. He watched reflections in the window, not the child, but the other passengers. How they looked everywhere except toward the sound. How they performed concern without moving, sympathy without proximity, care without risk. The train started to slow. Behind him, someone shifted weight. Not casual, deliberate. Then he heard it. Faint, barely audible under the crying and the steel-on-steel shriek of brakes. A radio click. The sound you hear when someone's listening to instructions through an earpiece. The lights flickered, just once, as they passed through the deepest part of the tunnel. In that single breath of darkness, Noel's reflection vanished from the window. When the fluorescence stuttered back on, he saw something new in the glass. A man 3 rows back. Dark jacket, neutral expression. Hand resting on something clipped to his belt. He wasn't looking at his phone. He was watching the 3 men with the baby, and his lips were moving. What did Noel just witness? Will he stay silent like he's been trained to? Or will his awareness pull him into something he can't walk away from? The lights came back harsh and immediate. Nobody else seemed to notice what he'd heard. Or maybe they'd learned the same lesson Noel had. That acknowledging things that require action is more dangerous than pretending blindness. He'd learned that lesson at 19. First pack interview. He'd pointed out the rotation schedule had a 3-day gap that would leave the youngest members unsupervised. The panel had smiled, thanked him, marked his file with a single word. Anxious. Second interview, different pack. He'd noticed the financial documents showed consistent monthly transfers to an account not listed in their charter. The interviewer had called it an accounting error, called Noel oversensitive. By the 3rd interview, he'd stopped mentioning what he saw. Harmless, the final assessment read. Non-essential sensitivity to environmental factors. It became his camouflage. The baby's pitch changed, sharper now, edged with the kind of exhaustion that comes before giving up. One of the men stood, tried to rock the child with arms that looked like they'd never held anything fragile. The movement was mechanical. Wrong rhythm. Too stiff. The baby wailed harder. He sat back down. The other two men didn't help. Just stared out the windows like they could will the destination closer through force of thought alone. Noel catalogued without meaning to. The tallest one kept checking his phone but never typed anything. The one who'd tried holding the baby had a scar cutting through his left eyebrow, pulling when he frowned. The third man, blonde, leaner than the others, tracked every passenger who moved past their row with eyes that never stopped calculating. Those were surveillance behaviors, professional ones. A woman across the aisle leaned toward her companion, whispered something behind her hand. Both glanced at the three men, then away. Phones appeared. Camera angles adjusted with practiced subtlety. The baby wasn't being comforted. Every attempt made things worse. Too much pressure. Wrong tempo. Mechanical effort where instinct should guide. Noel had been told his whole life that noticing these things meant deficiency. That functional people didn't track microexpressions like threat assessments. That normal omegas trusted their packs to handle complexity while they handled softer things. But systems don't label people non-essential by accident. They do it to justify what comes after, to make abandonment look like kindness, to make invisibility feel like protection. The train curved through another tunnel. Fluorescent lights flickered, longer this time. When they steadied, Noel caught the reflection again. Same man, same dark jacket, same neutral expression. But now his hand had moved from his belt to his ear, and he was nodding, like someone was giving him instructions. The baby's crying spiked into something that sounded like pain. A businessman 3 seats up stood halfway, hesitated, sat back down with an annoyed sigh that was just loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. Performative frustration. Evidence of concern without the burden of action. More phones appeared. The blonde man noticed. Noel watched his jaw tighten, watched him lean toward the others and say something too quiet to hear. The one with the scar shifted the baby to his other arm. For 5 seconds, the crying softened, then doubled. Noel's fingers curled against his knees. He counted his breaths, reminded himself that intervention meant visibility. Visibility meant evaluation. Evaluation meant decisions about your usefulness. And he'd already been deemed non-essential once. The train began to slow again. A station announcement crackled overhead, distorted and useless. The man with the earpiece stood up, started walking forward, toward the 3 men, toward the screaming baby. And Noel realized with cold, absolute certainty, this wasn't a coincidence. Who is the man with the earpiece and what does he want with the baby? Should Noel trust his instincts this time? Or will his awareness cost him more than silence ever could? The train pulled into the station with a mechanical sigh. Doors opened. Cold air rushed in, cutting through the overheated cabin. A few passengers stood, gathered bags, escaped gratefully into the crowd on the platform. New passengers boarded, including 2 people in transit authority uniforms who scanned the cabin with eyes that looked but didn't see, then took seats near the front. The man with the earpiece had stopped 3 rows from the men with the baby. He stood there, hand on the overhead rail, looking at his phone like every other commuter. But Noel saw the angle of his shoulders, the way his weight was distributed, the position that let him move fast if he needed to. Ready stance. The doors closed. The train lurched forward, and the baby screamed like something was tearing her apart from the inside. Passengers turned now. No more pretending. A teenage girl lifted her phone, angled it for a better shot. An older man stood halfway, hand raised like he might say something, then sat back down with visible frustration. Everyone wanted to be seen caring. Nobody wanted to actually help. The 3 men noticed the attention. Noel watched their postures change. Shoulders pulling tight, eyes sharpening. The blonde one leaned close to the others again. Said something that made the one with the scar shake his head once. Sharp. The man holding the baby tried bouncing her. Wrong tempo. Too stiff. She arched away from him, face going crimson. Someone behind Noel muttered, "Somebody should call someone." But the phones that appeared weren't dialing. They were recording, building evidence without context, turning distress into content, creating proof of something that looked like negligence if you didn't understand what was actually happening. Noel knew how this worked. He'd watched it happen in pact disputes, custody battles, contract negotiations. The truth mattered less than the narrative, and the narrative belonged to whoever controlled the documentation. His chest tightened with the feeling that came before bad outcomes. The same instinct that had warned him about pact contracts with exit clauses that only worked one direction. About interview questions designed to create evidence of instability. About relationships that promised safety but delivered control. The baby hiccuped, gasped, screamed again. The blond man pulled out his phone, typed something fast. One of the uniformed officers near the front glanced back. The man with the earpiece shifted his weight, and Noel felt the moment crystallize, the exact second where inaction becomes complicity, where watching becomes participation in whatever happens next. He was standing before the decision finished forming. His legs felt distant. His voice sounded farther, but he was already moving down the aisle, past passengers who looked up with surprise and concern and relief that someone else was handling it. "Excuse me." 3 faces turned toward him. The blond one's expression went flat and hard. The scarred one frowned. The third man, older, with a dark beard going silver at the edges, just waited. Noel kept his hands visible, relaxed, non-threatening. "I don't mean to intrude, but may I try?" Silence stretched for 3 seconds. The baby wailed. Then the blond one laughed, short and sharp like breaking glass. "You a doctor?" "No." Noel met his eyes briefly, then looked away, not submission, just de-escalation. "But I've noticed she gets worse when you try to fix her. She's not broken. She's afraid." More silence. The baby's screaming filled it like water filling a sinking ship. "And you're not afraid?" The bearded man's voice was quiet, dangerous in its calm. "I am," Noel said. Simple honesty felt safer than any lie. "But I'm used to it." The scarred one adjusted his grip on the baby. She arched harder, tiny fists clenched. "What's your name?" "Noel." "You pack bonded, Noel?" The question had edges. Noel recognized the shape. "No." "Why not?" "I was rejected." He watched the man's expression shift, calculation happening behind dark eyes. Mutual paperwork. Accurate outcome. The blonde one snorted. "So you're offering childcare advice? Why exactly?" Noel could have backed down. Should have. Every instinct trained into him over 3 years screamed to apologize, return to his seat, become invisible again. But the baby's crying was drilling into his skull, and he'd already crossed the distance between watching and acting. "Because nobody else is," he said simply. Then added the thing that would either save them or destroy him. "And because I think you're in danger." All 3 men went completely still. The cabin noise faded to background static. Even the baby's crying seemed to pause, just for a breath. "Explain." The bearded man's voice dropped even lower. Noel gestured to the cabin. Small movement, careful not to look threatening. 6 people recording. 2 transit officers who boarded at the last stop and haven't moved since. 1 man 3 rose back with an earpiece and a badge clip visible under his jacket. He paused. "Let them process. The crying is making you visible. And visibility is being documented." Another pause. Heavier. "Which means someone wants proof you can't care for her." The scarred one looked at the bearded one. Some kind of silent communication Noel couldn't decode. "And you can fix that?" The blonde one's skepticism had sharpened into something that could cut. "No," Noel said honestly. "But I can tell you what's making it worse." The bearded man studied him for 5 long seconds, then said one word. "Talk." Noel just revealed he sees the trap closing around these men. But who are they really? And why is someone watching them so carefully? More importantly, what happens when the watchers realize Noel sees them too? Noel took a breath. kept his voice low enough that only they could hear over the baby's crying and the train's rattling momentum. You're holding her like she might break. She reads that as rejection. You're trying to control the crying instead of responding to her fear. He watched their faces. She's escalating because every attempt to quiet her makes her feel more alone. The scarred one's jaw tightened. You're saying we're scaring her. I'm saying your fear is contagious. Noel met his eyes. Stop trying to fix her. Just stop being afraid of her. The baby screamed again, raw and desperate. How? The blonde one demanded. How do you just stop being afraid? You remember she's not the threat. Noel glanced toward the back of the cabin. They are. The bearded man followed his gaze. Saw the man with the earpiece. The phone's recording. The transit officers sitting too still. Understanding flickered across his expression. Then he looked down at the baby and did something unexpected. He relaxed. Not completely, just his shoulders. The tightness around his jaw. The rigid way he'd been holding his spine like armor. He looked at the child, not at a problem, but at a person. Hey, he said, low and quiet and almost gentle. Hey, you're all right? The crying didn't stop, but it changed, softened at the edges, broke into hiccups that sounded almost like questions. The blonde one stared. What did you? She needed you to stop treating her like a bomb, Noel said. Children know when you're afraid of them. The baby's crying dropped to whimpers, then to soft, shuddering breaths, then stopped. Silence crashed through the cabin like a wave breaking. Passengers looked up, looked at each other. The phone stayed raised, but the energy shifted, confusion replacing concern. The transit officers near the front exchanged glances. The man with the earpiece tapped his ear twice, and Noel heard the train's speaker crackle to life. Next stop, Federal Plaza. Doors will open on the right. The bearded man's eyes snapped to Noel's. Federal Plaza wasn't a regular stop on this line. It was a government building, with holding facilities. Sit down, the bearded man said quietly. It wasn't a request. Noel sat, not in his original seat, in the empty one across the aisle from them, where the blonde one gestured with sharp, efficient movement. The baby had settled against the scarred one's chest now. Her tiny fist clutched his collar. Her breathing evened out into something that sounded almost peaceful. Nobody spoke for 30 seconds. The train began to slow. Through the windows, Noel could see the platform approaching, empty except for 4 figures in dark suits. Not transit authority, not local police, federal. You were right, the bearded man said, voice barely above a whisper. We're being watched. Noel nodded. Why help us? The question landed heavier than it should have. Noel considered lying, considered saying something about basic decency or moral obligation. But these men had already shown they could read lies. Because watching bad things happen feels worse than the risk of trying to stop them, he said. The blonde one leaned back against his seat, studying Noel with new intensity. You said you were rejected. Yes. Why? Noel had practiced delivering this without emotion. 3 months of therapy and legal meetings had given him the script. Over-awareness. I notice things that make people uncomfortable. Like what? Lies. Patterns. When power structures depend on people not asking questions. Silence. The train slowed more. That why your pack rejected you? The bearded man's tone had shifted. Less interrogation. More recognition. They called it mutual. But it wasn't. No. The scarred one adjusted the baby with careful hands. She sighed in her sleep. What do you do now? Compliance work. Risk assessment for corporate clients. Meaning, I analyze systems for failure points. Tell companies where they're vulnerable before someone exploits it. The blonde one's smile was thin as a knife edge. And you found us. I found the pattern around you, Noel corrected. You're not the risk. You're the target. The train stopped. The doors didn't open yet. What did you see? The bearded man asked. Noel walked through it. The recordings starting before the baby's crying got bad. The The transit officers boarding at a non-standard stop. The man with the earpiece coordinating with someone. The phones all angled to capture the same thing. 3 men failing to comfort a child. They're building a case, he said. Not criminal. Optics. They want footage of you failing to care for her. They want witnesses who'll say you endangered a child. Why? Because taking her legally is complicated. Noel watched the federal agents on the platform move closer to the train. But if public opinion shifts first, if there's enough documentation of negligence, it stops being complicated. The bearded man finished. Noel nodded. The baby stirred against the scarred one's chest, made a small sound, settled again. You're not what I expected, the scarred one said quietly. What did you expect? Someone who wanted something from us. I do want something, Noel said. I want her to stop crying because she feels safe, not because she gave up. That landed somewhere Noel couldn't see. The 3 men exchanged looks loaded with meaning he couldn't decode. Years of communication in languages he'd never learned. Then the train's doors opened. The 4 federal agents stepped aboard. And the lead agent's voice cut through the cabin like a blade. Rook, Bastion, and Vale Serrano. Remain seated. Everyone else, stay calm. The Serranos. Noel just involved himself with the Serranos. And now federal agents are here. What exactly did he just walk into? And is there any way out that doesn't end with him being collateral damage? The bearded man, Rook, stood slowly. Hands visible. Movements careful. Non-threatening in the way that comes from practice. There a problem, officer? The lead agent's eyes scanned the cabin. Landed on Noel. On the baby sleeping against Vale's chest. His expression tightened. Who's that? Passenger, Rook said. Voice perfectly calm. Baby was crying. He helped. He'll need to hand over the child. The baby was still asleep. Her breathing soft and even. Peaceful in a way she hadn't been since Noel boarded. Why? Noel asked. Kept his voice polite. Confused. She's finally sleeping. The agent stepped closer. His badge read Morrison in clean block letters. This is federal business. You need to. I need identification of authority and explanation of cause before complying with custody transfer involving a minor, Noel said. Then added, Sir. Morrison's expression hardened like concrete setting. You a lawyer? Risk assessment specialist. Noel adjusted his posture slightly, not aggressive, just grounded. I'm aware of protocols. Silence spread through the cabin. The other 3 agents waited behind Morrison. The transit officers near the front stood but didn't approach. Passengers held their phones higher. Morrison pulled out his phone, stepped back 3 feet, made a call Noel couldn't hear. And in that moment, watching Morrison's jaw work while he listened to whoever was on the other end, Noel understood. They hadn't expected resistance. They'd expected the Serranos to be alone, struggling. Documented failing with a screaming baby and no one willing to help. The baby's presence in Vale's arms, calm, settled, safe, wasn't just a complication. It was evidence that contradicted the narrative someone had spent time building. Morrison ended his call. His eyes found Rook's. Change of plans, he said. Everyone stays seated until we reach the next station. And then, Bastion, the blonde one, asked, then we'll reassess the situation. Morrison gestured to his team. They backed toward the doors, stepped onto the platform. The doors closed behind them. The train didn't move. For 15 seconds, nothing happened. Then the train lurched forward. Passengers exhaled. Phones lowered. The tension that had been pulling the cabin tight released just enough for people to pretend everything was normal. Noel's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out. Unknown number. Text message. Clever. Won't work twice. He stared at the screen. Looked up. Rook was watching him. What? Rook asked. Noel showed him. Rook's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes did. Something cold and calculating and very, very dangerous. They're not done, he said quietly. What does that mean? Bastion leaned forward. Means they're changing tactics. Morrison doesn't give up. He adapts. To what? To whatever works. Vale shifted the baby carefully. She made a small sound but didn't wake. If intimidation doesn't work, he'll try exposure. Public pressure. Force us into a position where refusing cooperation looks like guilt. Noelle's chest tightened. How? Next stop, Rook said. They'll board again. Different approach. More witnesses. Better optics. The train began to slow. Already. They'll make it look like a rescue, Bastian added. His voice had gone flat. 3 dangerous men. 1 innocent child. 1 civilian caught in the middle. Noelle looked at the baby, at her tiny fist still clutching Vale's collar. At the piece on her face that hadn't been there 20 minutes ago. What do I do? He asked. Rook met his eyes. You get off at this stop. Walk away. Forget you saw us. And her. We'll handle it. How? Silence. The train stopped. The doors opened, and 6 people boarded. 3 agents, 2 uniformed officers, and 1 woman in a crisp blazer carrying a tablet, wearing an expression of professional concern that Noelle recognized immediately. Child Protective Services. The woman approached with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Hello, I'm Dr. Sarah Chun, Child Protective Services. She looked at the baby. I understand there's been some concern about this infant's welfare. Dr. Chun is here. Morrison changed tactics fast. And Noelle has exactly 1 chance to walk away before he becomes part of whatever legal nightmare is about to unfold. So why aren't his feet moving toward the exit? There's no concern, Rook said evenly. She's fine, Dr. Chen's smile stayed perfectly in place. Professional. Practiced. The kind of expression that came from years of delivering bad news wrapped in compassionate language. I can see she's sleeping now, which is wonderful. Her voice carried that warm honey quality that made disagreement feel like cruelty. But we've received multiple reports of prolonged distress. I'll need to do a brief assessment. She was crying earlier, Noelle said. The words came out before he could stop them. She's not anymore. Dr. Chen's eyes shifted to him. Catalogued. Filed away for later use. And you are? Noelle Ardent. Relationship to the child? None. I'm a passenger who helped when she was upset. Dr. Chun made a note on her tablet. Her fingers moved quickly, efficiently. That's very kind of you, Mr. Ardent, but I'll need to examine her to ensure there are no medical issues causing the distress. The trap was elegant in its simplicity. If they refused, they looked guilty. If they complied, she'd find something. Babies were fragile, and fear could be read as medical concern in the right light. A slightly elevated heart rate, residual stress markers, any physiological evidence that could be spun into neglect. Noelle saw it clearly, the way the pieces fit together, the documentation building into something that would look damning without context. Of course, he said. His voice stayed calm, reasonable. But I'd like to understand the legal basis for the examination. Has a warrant been issued? Dr. Chen's smile tightened at the edges. Microscopic. Most people wouldn't notice. Noelle noticed everything. This is a welfare check, not an arrest, she said. We don't need. Actually, you do. Noelle kept his tone pleasant. Educational, even, like he was clarifying a simple misunderstanding. Family Code Section 16501 requires either documented probable cause or parental consent for involuntary examination of a minor in protective custody situations. Dr. Chen's pen stopped moving. Morrison stepped forward from where he'd been waiting by the doors. Sir, you're interfering with. I'm requesting clarification, Noelle said, which is my right as a citizen in a public space. The baby stirred against Vale's chest. He rocked her gently, the right rhythm this time, the movement instinctive rather than mechanical. She settled without waking. The cabin had gone completely silent. Every passenger watching. Phones raised, recording everything. Dr. Chun looked at Morrison. Morrison looked at Noelle. The math was changing in real time. The narrative they'd built. 3 dangerous men unable to care for a child. was crumbling under the weight of one calm civilian asking reasonable questions. "We have witnesses," Morrison said finally. "Multiple passengers reported potential endangerment." "Potential endangerment isn't a legal standard," Noel replied. "It's an assumption. Are you refusing to cooperate? I'm requesting you follow procedure." The air in the cabin felt charged, electric, like the moment before lightning strikes. Morrison's jaw worked. Noel could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. The cost-benefit analysis of pushing harder versus backing off. Of creating a scene that would be recorded and shared versus maintaining the appearance of professional restraint. Then Morrison smiled. It was worse than his anger would have been. "Fine," he said. "We'll document non-compliance and proceed through appropriate channels." He looked at Rook. "You'll be hearing from us." He gestured to his team. They left, Dr. Chun included, though she paused at the doors long enough to make another note on her tablet. The doors closed. The train lurched forward. For 10 seconds, nobody spoke. Then Vale exhaled slowly. "That was not over," Rook said. His voice was flat. "Final." Noel looked at him. "What do you mean?" "They got what they wanted. But we didn't comply." "Exactly." Bastian leaned back against his seat. His expression had gone cold. "Now they have footage of us using a civilian as a shield. Of you interfering with official business. They'll spin it as manipulation." Noel's chest tightened. "But I chose to." "Doesn't matter." Rook met his eyes. "They'll make you look coerced. Us look desperate. Her look endangered." The baby made a small sound in her sleep. Peaceful. Trusting. Completely unaware that the adults around her were losing a battle she didn't know was being fought. "What happens now?" Noel asked quietly. Rook's phone buzzed. He checked it. His expression went carefully blank in the way that meant the news was bad. "They've filed an emergency petition," he said. "Judge will hear it in 2 hours. Can you win?" "No." The word sat in the air like a stone dropped into still water. Heavy. Final. Sinking. Around them, passengers were returning to their phones. Their books. Their carefully maintained bubbles of not my problem. The crisis had passed. The entertainment was over. Life was returning to normal for everyone except the people who mattered. "Then why did we do this?" Noel asked. "Because doing nothing guarantees the outcome," Rook said. "Doing something at least changes the variables." The train pulled into the next station. More passengers boarded. Life continued its forward momentum, indifferent to the small tragedies happening in its corners. Noel looked at the baby, at her tiny fingers still clutching Vale's collar, at the peace on her face that hadn't existed before he'd stood up and crossed an aisle that might as well have been a canyon. "I want to help," he said. Bastian laughed, sharp and humorless. "You already did. Look where it got us." "I mean at the hearing." Silence. "Why?" Rook asked. "Because I saw what happened. I can testify that she wasn't endangered, that you responded when given clear guidance, that the crying stopped when you stopped being afraid." "They won't let you testify." "Why not?" "Because you're not family, not medical professional, not law enforcement." Rook's voice was tired. "You're just a stranger who got involved in something that wasn't your business. That makes me the only objective witness you have." More silence. The train emerged from underground into afternoon sunlight. The change was jarring. Darkness to light in seconds, like waking from a dream into something harsher and more real. "If you testify," Rook said slowly, "you'll be connected to us. To this. Morrison will dig into your background. Find the rejection. Use it to paint you as unstable. Someone with questionable judgment who inserted himself into a volatile situation for attention. Let him. You don't know what you're saying." "I know exactly what I'm saying." Noel met his eyes. "I've been evaluated before. Been torn apart by people looking for weaknesses. Had my awareness called anxiety and my precision called paranoia." He paused. "I survived it then. I'll survive it now." Bastian studied him with new interest. "You mean that?" "Yes." Why? The question landed heavier than it should have. Noel thought about his settlement papers, about the word non-essential, about 3 years of making himself small and quiet and harmless because survival meant invisibility, about how watching this baby cry while people performed concern without action had felt like watching every other system failure he'd ever witnessed. Because I'm tired of being non-essential, he said finally, and because someone needs to say what actually happened. The train began to slow again. Rook's phone buzzed. He checked it, showed the screen to Bastian and Vale. Their expressions shifted in ways Noel couldn't read. What? He asked. My lawyer, Rook said. She wants to know if we have any witnesses willing to testify. He looked at Noel. Last chance to walk away. Noel thought about it. Really thought about it. About his quiet life doing compliance work for corporations that paid him to find problems they could ignore safely. About his small apartment with furniture he'd bought secondhand because starting over was expensive. About the careful routine he'd built to make loneliness feel like independence. About how none of it had ever felt like choosing, just surviving. Tell her yes, he said. Rook held his gaze for 3 long seconds, then typed a message. Sent it. The response came back immediately. She'll meet us at the courthouse, Rook said. Hearing starts in 90 minutes. The train stopped. They stood. Vale adjusted the baby carefully. She was waking now, blinking against the light, making small questioning sounds that weren't quite crying yet. Hey! Vale murmured to her. Soft, gentle. You're all right. She looked at him with wide, uncertain eyes, then settled against his chest again. They stepped onto the platform together. For people who'd been strangers an hour ago, now connected by something that felt less like choice and more like gravity. Behind them, Noel heard a phone camera click. He turned, saw a passenger from the train lowering her phone quickly. Guiltily, the documentation hadn't stopped. It had just moved to a new platform. Noel just committed to testifying in a federal hearing for people he met an hour ago. Morrison has already proven he plays dirty. And somewhere, someone is still recording everything. What could possibly go wrong? The courthouse smelled like floor polish and fear. Noel sat in the hallway outside courtroom 3B, watching lawyers move past with briefcases and tired eyes. The building felt designed to make people small. High ceilings, marble floors, voices that echoed and got lost in all that empty space. Beside him, Rook sat perfectly still. Bastian paced. Vale held the baby, who'd started fussing again 20 minutes ago and hadn't stopped. She knows, Vale said quietly. Babies always know. The door to the courtroom opened. A woman emerged, mid-40s, sharp suit, sharper eyes. She carried exhaustion like armor, wore it so comfortably it had become part of her uniform. Tessa Kwan, she said, extending a hand to Noel. You're the witness? Noel ardent. Her handshake was brief, professional. She was already moving to the next thing before her hand left his. I need you to understand something before we go in there. Tessa's voice was low, urgent. Morrison has video, multiple angles, the baby crying, you approaching, the confrontation with the agents, all of it out of context. I know, you know, but do you understand? She leaned closer. He's going to make you look like either a victim or an accomplice. Either you were manipulated by these men, or you're working with them. Either way, your credibility disappears. So what do I say? The truth, exactly as it happened. No emotion, no editorializing. She glanced at Rook. And for God's sake, don't try to protect them. The judge will see through it. A bailiff appeared at the courtroom door. Judge Calloway is ready. They stood. The baby's crying got louder. The courtroom was smaller than Noel expected, less dramatic. Wood paneling and fluorescent lights and a judge who looked like she'd been hearing cases since before Noel was born. Judge Calloway, a black woman with silver hair and reading glasses on a chain, surveyed the room with an expression that suggested she'd already heard every lie worth telling. This is an emergency petition for protective custody, she said. Let's keep it focused on the relevant facts. Morrison stood. Your Honor, the state has significant concerns about the welfare of the minor child currently in the custody of Rook, Bastion, and Vale Serrano. He pulled up a video on a screen. The train, the baby crying. The footage was edited tight, just the worst moments. The screaming that went on and on. The men looking helpless. Passengers filming. Then Noel approaching. The angle made it look confrontational. Aggressive, even. As you can see, Morrison continued, the child experienced prolonged distress while in the defendant's care. Multiple witnesses reported concern for her safety. When Child Protective Services attempted to intervene, the defendants used a civilian to obstruct official duties. He clicked to another image. Noel standing between the agents and the Serranos. The baby visible behind him. The framing made it look like Noel was blocking access deliberately. The state believes this child is at risk, Morrison finished. We're requesting immediate removal and placement in protective custody pending a full investigation. Judge Calloway looked at Tessa. Response. Tessa stood. Your Honor, the state's presentation is highly selective. They've shown you crying but not resolution. Distress but not the response to that distress. Obstruction but not the context for why a private citizen felt compelled to request legal clarification. She gestured to Noel. Mr. Ardent is here to testify about what actually happened on that train. Not the edited version. The complete picture. Judge Calloway nodded. Call your witness. Noel stood, walked to the witness stand, swore to tell the truth. Saturday. Tessa approached. Mr. Ardent, can you describe what you observed on the train this afternoon? He did, factually, without emotion. The baby crying, the men trying and failing, the recordings starting before the situation justified them. The transit officers boarding at a non-standard stop. The man with the earpiece coordinating something. When you offered to help, Tessa asked, were you coerced? No. Threatened? No. Then why did you help? Noel looked at the judge. Because I work in risk assessment. I identify failure points in systems. And I saw a system failing. What system? The one that prioritizes documentation over intervention. That rewards witnesses more than helpers. That turns distress into content. Morrison stood. Objection. The witness is editorializing. Overruled. Judge Calloway leaned forward. I want to hear this. Noel continued. Everyone on that train had a phone. Everyone was recording. But nobody helped. They just documented. Created evidence without context. Built a narrative that made the baby's crying proof of negligence instead of communication. And when you intervened? I explained that the baby was escalating because the men were afraid. That children sense fear and mirror it. That controlling crying is different from responding to distress. What happened then? They listened, changed their approach. The baby stopped crying. Tessa pulled up her own video, different angle, longer cut. The moment Vale relaxed. The baby's crying shifting. The silence that followed. Does this accurately represent what you witnessed? Yes. Tessa sat down. Morrison stood immediately. Mr. Ardent, you testified that you're not pack-bonded. Is that correct? Yes. Why not? Tessa started to object, but Noel spoke first. I was rejected. By how many packs? 3. And the reason given? Noel felt the trap closing. Saw exactly where Morrison was going. But lying would be worse than the truth. Over-awareness, he said. I notice patterns that make people uncomfortable. Such as lies, manipulation. When power depends on people not asking questions. Morrison smiled. So you have a history of seeing conspiracy where none exists. No, I have a history of seeing problems before they become crises. Or inserting yourself into situations seeking validation. Objection, Tessa said. Counsel is testifying. Sustained. Morrison shifted tactics. Mr. Ardent, you testified that you work in risk assessment. Who are your current clients? I'm an independent contractor. How many active contracts do you have? 2. And before this incident, had you ever met the Serrano brothers? No. Had you heard of them? No. So within minutes of meeting 3 strangers on a train, you felt qualified to give them parenting advice, obstruct federal agents, and insert yourself into what you admit was a dangerous situation? Noel held his gaze. I didn't give parenting advice. I gave observation, and I didn't obstruct agents. I requested legal clarification. You prevented Dr. Chun from examining the child. I asked for the legal basis for involuntary examination. She couldn't provide one. Morrison's jaw tightened. You realize this child is evidence in an ongoing federal investigation? Then she should be treated according to evidence protocols, which include chain of custody documentation and legal basis for transfer. Silence. Judge Calloway was watching now. Really watching. Mr. Ardent, she said. Do you believe this child is safe with the Serrano brothers? The question cut through everything else. Noel thought about Vale's careful hands, Rook's quiet assessment, Bastion's sharp protection. The way they'd listened when he explained their fear was the problem. I believe they're learning, he said, which is more than most people do. Judge Calloway made a note, looked at Morrison. Agent Morrison, do you have evidence of direct harm to this child? The prolonged crying is not harm, it's communication. She looked at Dr. Chun, who'd been sitting quietly in the gallery. Dr. Chun, your assessment? Dr. Chun stood, adjusted her tablet. The child showed no signs of physical abuse during my brief observation. However, the emotional distress was resolved by a stranger on a train, Judge Calloway interrupted, which suggests the problem wasn't the caregivers. It was the environment. She paused. Let that sink in. I'm denying the emergency petition. Morrison's face went rigid. The baby made a small sound. Not crying, just present. However, Judge Calloway continued, I'm ordering supervised visitation for the next 30 days. Monthly welfare checks by an independent evaluator, not Dr. Chun. And mandatory parenting classes focusing on infant stress response. She looked at Rook. If you want to keep her, gentlemen, you'll prove you can care for her, not just protect her. Understood. Yes, Your Honor, Rook said. The gavel fell. Morrison gathered his papers with movements that were too controlled, too careful. The kind of calm that came from rage compressed into professionalism. He left without looking at Noel. Outside the courtroom, Tessa squeezed Noel's shoulder. Thank you. Will they appeal? Probably. Will they win? She hesitated. Eventually, maybe. Federal prosecutors have long memories and deep pockets. Noel nodded. He'd expected that answer. Rook approached, extended his hand. Noel shook it. Why did you do it? Rook asked. You gained nothing. Noel thought about his settlement papers. About the word non-essential. About 3 years of being invisible. I gained evidence, he said finally. That choosing to act is different from being forced to watch. Rook studied him. If you ever need anything, I know where to find you. 2 weeks later, the appeals court reversed the decision. The baby was removed anyway. The judge denied Morrison's petition, but appeals courts don't care about small victories. They care about precedent. And precedent said the Serranos were never going to win this fight. So what was the point of any of it? The second hearing happened in a different building. Noel wasn't called to testify this time, just asked to submit a written statement. 3 pages, single-spaced, detailing everything he'd observed. Facts only. No interpretation. He wrote it carefully, precisely, signed it, sent it, then waited. 3 days later, the appeals court ruled. The decision was technical, procedural, the kind of legal language that translated to, we're not saying you're wrong, but we're overruling you anyway. The baby was removed from the Serranos' custody, pending a full investigation into their fitness as guardians. Noel found out through Tessa, who called during his lunch break. They took her this morning, she said. Her voice was flat. Professional distance protecting her from feeling too much. Foster placement specializing in high-risk removals. Where? I can't tell you that. Can the Serranos visit? Supervised only. Once a week. Pending evaluation. Noel sat with that. What are the chances they get her back? Silence on the other end. Long enough that he knew the answer before she spoke. Slim, Tessa said finally. Morrison's building a case that goes beyond this one incident. He's arguing pattern of behavior, criminal associations, environment unsuitable for child rearing. Even though she was safe with them, safety isn't the standard. Perception is. She sighed. I'm sorry, Noel. You did everything right. Sometimes the system just... I know, he said. After they hung up, he sat in his car for 20 minutes, staring at nothing, feeling the weight of what doing the right thing actually cost. A baby he'd held for 30 minutes was gone. The men he'd tried to help were losing a fight they'd never had fair odds of winning. And he'd gained exactly nothing except confirmation that his awareness, his ability to see systems failing in real time, changed nothing that mattered. He drove home, made dinner, worked on a compliance report for a client who paid him to find problems they could ignore safely. Life continued its forward momentum. The world kept turning, indifferent to small tragedies. But something had shifted. A week later, 2 men in suits appeared at his apartment. They showed badges. FBI, Internal Affairs Division. Mr. Ardent, we'd like to ask you some questions about Agent Morrison. He let them in. They sat at his kitchen table, pulled out a folder. You testified in an emergency custody hearing 2 weeks ago, the first agent said. His name was Hayes, early 50s, tired eyes. Your statement included observations about coordination between transit officers and federal agents. Yes. Can you elaborate on that? Noel walked through it again. The officers boarding at a non-standard stop. The man with the earpiece. The timing that was too precise to be coincidental. Hayes made notes. The second agent, younger, named Torres, leaned forward. Mr. Ardent, did Agent Morrison ever contact you after the hearing? He sent a text. Clever. Won't work twice. Do you still have that message? Noel pulled out his phone. Showed them. Hayes photographed it with his own phone. We're investigating irregularities in several of Agent Morrison's cases, he said carefully. Specifically, cases involving emergency custody removals where the timing of intervention suggests prior coordination. Noel understood immediately. You think he's staging these situations. We think he's creating documentation that supports predetermined outcomes. Hayes closed his folder. Your testimony raised questions. We're following up. What do you need from me? Nothing yet, but you may be contacted for a deposition. If you are, we'd appreciate your cooperation. Of course. They stood to leave. At the door, Torres paused. For what it's worth, your statement was the first time anyone questioned Morrison's methods on record. That matters. After they left, Noel sat at his table for a long time, thinking about systems, about how corruption worked. Slowly, quietly, protected by the assumption that authority equals legitimacy. About how one person asking questions didn't stop the machine, but it could make the machine visible. 3 months passed. Noel testified twice more, sealed depositions in rooms without windows. He answered questions about Morrison, about Dr. Chen's timing, about why multiple witnesses on the train had nearly identical statements despite sitting in different cars. He answered factually, completely, then went back to his life and tried not to think about a baby he'd never see again. But he kept track. Morrison was reassigned. Quietly. No press release. No announcement. Just a bureaucratic shuffle that meant he'd never handle child welfare cases again. Dr. Chen's contract with CPS wasn't renewed. 2 transit officers took early retirement. None of it made headlines. That was how corruption ended when the system protected itself, with just enough consequence to prevent lawsuits but not enough to admit fault. The Serranos' petition for custody was denied permanently. Tessa called to tell him, "It's over." Did they fight it? They couldn't. Morrison's investigation turned up enough about their business dealings to make custody impossible. She paused. The baby's been placed with a family. Good people. Stable. She'll be safe. But not with them. No. After the call ended, Noelle sat with that reality. They'd done everything right. The baby was still gone. But the pattern that took her had been exposed. Practices that shouldn't exist were being investigated. Cases were being reviewed. Change without restoration. Justice without reunion. Truth that cost more than silence but bought less than hope. For months after the train, Noelle got an email. Subject. Reference. Mr. Ardent. Your depositions were instrumental in our investigation into irregular child removal practices. While I cannot share details, I wanted you to know. Patterns you identified led to policy changes affecting 47 cases. Your attention to detail prevented significant harm. Thank you. Internal Affairs Division. He read it 3 times. Saved it. Then closed his laptop and sat with the weight of what he'd learned. That doing the right thing doesn't always save what you love. That courage isn't measured by outcomes. That sometimes the system breaks what it touches, but people who notice the breaking can still redirect the damage. He'd held a baby for 30 minutes, lost her anyway, but changed the machine that took her. And 47 other children wouldn't face what she had. It wasn't comfort, wasn't closure. But it was something. Noelle exposed corruption that affected dozens of cases. Morrison lost his position, but the baby is still gone, and the Serranos lost their fight. So was any of it worth it? Or does doing the right thing only matter if you can live with permanent loss? 6 months after the train, Noelle walked past a playground. It was autumn, the kind of afternoon where light came gold through trees and made everything look staged for a memory nobody asked for. He wasn't looking for anything, just walking, taking a route home that avoided the highway traffic. His phone buzzed. Work email. Another compliance contract. Another company wanting him to find problems they could document and ignore safely. He was reaching to silence it when he heard the sound. A child's laugh, high and bright and completely delighted. He stopped. The playground was small. Neighborhood park with old equipment and wood chips that needed replacing. A woman pushed a child on a swing. Maybe 18 months old now, wearing a pink jacket and tiny sneakers that kicked at the air with joyful randomness. The child threw her head back, fearless, trusting the rhythm completely. Noelle recognized the shape of that trust. The way she grabbed at air like it was something she could hold. His chest tightened. He knew better than to approach. Knew that interrupting would raise questions he couldn't answer without sounding like exactly what Morrison had tried to paint him as, unstable, inserting himself into situations that weren't his business. But he watched, just for a minute, long enough to see she was fed, cared for, loved in the specific way that came from choice rather than obligation. The woman noticed him watching. Her expression shifted, protective, wary. The instinct every parent developed in a world where strangers were potential threats. Noelle nodded once, kept walking. Some good deeds don't come with reunions. That night, he opened his laptop, pulled up the settlement paperwork from his PAC rejection. Documents he'd kept in a folder labeled closed, because looking at them hurt too much. He read through them carefully, found the section about emergency contacts, changed it from none to Tessa Kwan's office number. Then he opened a new document, started drafting a proposal for independent child advocacy, the kind that got called when systems needed someone who noticed what they'd rather ignore. Someone who asked questions about timing and coordination and evidence that looked too perfect. He researched certification requirements, training programs, legal frameworks, wrote for 3 hours. By the time he finished, he had a 15-page outline for a service that probably wouldn't make money and definitely wouldn't make him popular. But it would make him useful. Not non-essential. Not invisible. Actually useful. He saved the document, sent it to Tessa with a subject line that just said, "Thoughts?" Her response came back 20 minutes later. "This is brilliant and needed. Let's talk." They met for coffee the next day. Tessa brought a folder thick with case files. Situations where she'd needed an objective witness but couldn't find anyone willing to get involved. Custody disputes where both sides were lying. Removal cases where the documentation didn't match the timeline. Systems failing in ways that only became visible if someone was paying attention. "You'd be doing this as a contractor," she said. "Court-appointed in some cases, privately hired in others. The pay is terrible and the work is heartbreaking." "Sounds perfect," Noelle said. She smiled. Tired but genuine. "You mean that?" "I do." "Why?" He thought about the baby on the train. About 47 cases changed by patterns he'd identified. About how his awareness, the thing that had gotten him rejected 3 times, had actually prevented harm. "Because being too aware isn't a defect," he said. "It's a skill. And I'm tired of pretending it's not." Tessa slid the folder across the table. "Start here. 3 cases. Read through them. Tell me what you see that everyone else missed." He opened the first file, started reading, found the inconsistencies within 10 minutes. By the end of the week, he'd identified problems in all 3 cases. Submitted reports that were clear, factual, and devastating to the narratives both sides were trying to build. 2 cases settled. 1 went to trial, and the judge cited Noelle's observations in her ruling. A child stayed with family instead of being removed. Not because of heroics, because someone had paid attention. 3 months later, Noelle had 12 active cases, a certification as an independent child advocate, a reputation for being difficult to work with because he wouldn't adjust his findings to match what lawyers wanted to hear. He was making less money than he had doing corporate compliance, working longer hours, dealing with systems that resisted transparency like organisms rejecting antibodies. But when he looked at himself in the mirror, he recognized the person looking back. Someone who'd chosen what to build instead of what to survive. Someone who belonged to himself. The Serranos never got their baby back. Noelle never saw her again after that afternoon at the playground. Morrison faced no criminal charges, just reassignment and a quiet suggestion to retire early. Dr. Chun found work in a different state doing the same thing under a different agency. The system protected itself the way systems always did. But 47 cases changed. Policy reforms happened slowly. Amendments to custody evaluation procedures, requirements for independent observation in disputed removals, oversight on emergency petitions. Nothing dramatic, just small corrections that would prevent some future child from being taken by a system more interested in documentation than truth. Noelle's phone rang late one Thursday. "Tessa, I just got a call from Judge Calloway," she said. "She's putting together a task force on child welfare reform. Wants to know if you'd be interested in serving as an advisor." "Me? Your testimony in the Serrano case is still being cited in appellate briefs. You changed how judges think about evidence versus observation." Noelle sat with that. What would it involve? Meetings, policy review, probably a lot of frustration with bureaucrats who resist change. She paused. No pay, just the satisfaction of making the system slightly less broken. He thought about the baby on the swing, about recognition without reunion, about how the measure of doing right wasn't always getting what you wanted. Sometimes it was changing what came after. "Tell her yes," he said. That night, he updated his emergency contact information again. Under "in case of emergency," he listed Tessa. Under relationship, he wrote, "chosen family." Felt true. Not in the way pack bonds were supposed to feel, deep and instinctive and rooted in biology, but in a different way. Built instead of given. Chosen instead of assigned. Belonging that came from shared purpose rather than shared blood. He looked at his calendar. Tomorrow, 3 case reviews, 1 court appearance, a meeting with Judge Calloway's task force. Next week, certification renewal, 2 depositions, coffee with Tessa to go over a case that was falling apart. No reunion with the baby. No vindication that felt complete. No fairy tale ending where everything he'd lost was returned. Just work. Purpose. The quiet satisfaction of knowing that his awareness, the thing that had made him too much for 3 different packs, was exactly enough for this. He closed his laptop, made tea, sat at his kitchen table and watched the sun set through his window. Tomorrow, he'd fight systems that didn't want to be fought. Tonight, he'd rest in the knowledge that some fights were worth losing if they changed the battlefield. And he'd changed it, one careful observation at a time. Noel never got his happy ending. The baby's gone. The Serranos lost. Morrison barely faced consequences. But sometimes winning isn't about getting everything back. It's about making sure the next person has better odds. Is that enough? Tell us what you think in the comments below. Spring came slowly. Noel noticed it the way he noticed everything now, not as decoration but as data. The temperature shift that meant different clothing on playgrounds. The longer daylight that changed when parents picked up children. The way seasonal allergies affected courtroom testimonies made witnesses irritable, judges impatient. Details mattered. 18 months after the train, he sat in Judge Calloway's chambers reviewing a case file that made his chest tight with familiar anger. "Another emergency removal," he said, sliding the document across her desk. Same timing pattern, same coordinating agency. Different agent, but the methodology matches Morrison's old cases. Judge Calloway removed her glasses, rubbed the bridge of her nose with the exhaustion of someone who'd spent decades fighting systems designed to resist exactly this kind of scrutiny. "You're sure?" Transit officers boarding at non-standard stops. Phones recording before the incident escalates. CPS worker arriving within minutes of the complaint. He tapped the timeline. "It's too clean. Real emergencies are messy." She studied the file, made notes in margins with a pen that had probably signed 1,000 custody orders. "What do you recommend?" "Independent investigation. Pull communications records. Interview the witnesses separately. They'll have identical statements if this was coordinated. That'll take months. The child's already placed. Taking months protects them better than rushing to judgment protected the last 47. Judge Calloway smiled, tired but genuine. "You've gotten harder. I've gotten clearer." She signed the order for investigation. "How many cases are you carrying now?" 16 active. 6 pending review. "That's too many." "It's enough." She looked at him over her glasses. Really looked, the way she did when she was reading past what people said to what they meant. "You're not trying to save her anymore, are you?" Noel didn't need to ask who she meant.
"No," he said. "I'm trying to make sure the system that took her doesn't take the next one the same way." "Is that enough?" He thought about that question. Had thought about it for 18 months, through depositions and policy meetings and late nights reviewing files that detailed suffering in clinical language. "It has to be," he said finally, "because the alternative is pretending it didn't matter that I noticed." Judge Calloway nodded, filed the order. "You know the Serranos requested a meeting." Noel went still. "Why?" "They wouldn't say. Just asked if you'd be willing to meet. No legal obligation. Just..." She gestured vaguely. "Closure, maybe." "When?" "Tomorrow. 2 o'clock. Tessa's office." He left chambers with that knowledge sitting heavy in his chest. The next afternoon, Noel arrived 15 minutes early. Tessa met him at the door with coffee and the careful neutrality of someone preparing for emotional landmines. "They didn't tell me why either," she said. "But Rook sounded different." "Different how?" "Tired, but not defeated." The Serranos arrived exactly at 2. They looked older, sharper in some ways, worn in others. Men who'd learned that power had limits and survival required adaptation. Rook extended his hand. Noel shook it. "Thank you for coming," Rook said. They sat, Noel and Tessa on one side of the conference table, the 3 brothers on the other. Like a negotiation. Like opposing sides of something nobody wanted to fight anymore. "We've been following your work," Bastian said. His voice had lost some of its sharp edge, replaced with something steadier. "The task force, the policy changes, the cases you've flagged for review." Noel waited. 47 cases, Vale added. "That's what the internal report said. 47 children who didn't face what she did." Silence settled between them. We wanted you to know, Rook said slowly, that we understand now what you were trying to do on that train. You were trying to do the same thing, Noel said. No. Rook's expression shifted, something like regret, something like acceptance. We were trying to protect one child because we failed to protect her father. You were trying to protect a principle. The principle didn't save her. No, but it changed what came after. Rook pulled out a folder, slid it across the table. We've been funding independent child advocacy programs. Started with 3 cities, now 12. We used your proposal as the framework. Noel opened the folder, saw his own words, the 15-page outline he'd sent to Tessa, formatted into official program documentation. Saw funding allocations, training protocols, case outcome statistics. You did this. We did what we're good at, Bastian said. We moved money where it needed to go, created pressure where systems needed pressure, made it expensive for agencies to ignore advocates like you. Noel looked at the numbers. Hundreds of thousands of dollars, dozens of advocates trained, cases reviewed, policies challenged, children protected. Why? He asked. The 3 brothers exchanged looks. Because you were right, Rook said simply. On that train, you saw what we were too afraid to see, that protecting her meant more than keeping her close. It meant changing the system that would always see us as threats. We couldn't save her, Vale added. His voice was quieter than Noel remembered. But we could make sure other people like you had resources we didn't. Tessa was reading through the documents now, making small sounds of surprise as she recognized case names, policy changes, funding sources that had seemed anonymous but now made sense. You've been doing this for how long? She asked. 14 months, Bastian said. Since the appeals court ruling. Why didn't you say anything? Because it wasn't about credit. Rook looked at Noel. It was about making sure what you started didn't stop when you ran out of energy to fight alone. Noel felt something shift in his chest. Not closure, closure implied endings, and this felt more like continuation. Like a pattern he'd identified had been recognized by others who could act on it in ways he couldn't. The baby, he said. Do you know? She's safe, Vale said. We check, quietly, through lawyers and third parties. She's with a family that chose her. They don't know who we are, don't know the history, just know she needed parents who could love her without the weight of everything that came before. That's good, Noel said, and meant it. We'll never see her again, Rook added. That's the price of keeping her safe from our world. We accepted that. But you wanted me to know, Noel said, that the work continued. We wanted you to know you weren't alone in it. They talked for another hour. About cases, about systems, about the slow, grinding work of changing institutions that protected themselves first and children second. About how power could be redirected when people who had it decided to build instead of control. When they stood to leave, Rook paused at the door. You asked me once why we were in danger, he said. On the train. Do you remember? Yes. You were right. We were dangerous, but not because of what we did. Because of who we were. The system couldn't allow people like us to succeed at something like parenting. It undermined too many narratives. And now we've learned to be dangerous differently. He smiled small, genuine. We make systems uncomfortable by funding the people who ask questions they can't answer. After they left, Noel sat with Tessa in the quiet office. That was unexpected, she said. Yes. How do you feel? He considered the question honestly. Like the story didn't end the way I thought it would, he said finally. But maybe it ended the way it needed to. Is that enough? The same question Judge Calloway had asked. Noel thought about the baby on the swing, about 47 cases changed, about advocates being trained in 12 cities, about systems shifting slowly under pressure from people who refused to stop noticing what was broken. It's more than I started with, he said. That night, Noel updated his emergency contacts one final time. Under "in case of emergency," he listed 3 numbers: Tessa, Judge Calloway's chambers, and after a long moment of consideration, Rook Serrano. Under relationship, he wrote, chosen network, not pack, not family in the traditional sense, but people who'd seen him be exactly what he was, too aware, too precise, too unwilling to pretend blindness, and decided that was exactly what they needed. He looked at his calendar. Tomorrow, 2 court appearances, 3 case reviews, a meeting with new advocates being trained in the program the Serranos funded. Next month, testimony before the state legislature on custody evaluation reform. No reunion with the baby he'd held for 30 minutes on a train. No vindication that felt complete. No ending that wrapped everything in resolution. Just continuation. Purpose built from loss. Belonging chosen from awareness. And the quiet knowledge that courage wasn't measured by what you saved, but by what you refused to stop building after everything you loved was taken away. He closed his laptop, made tea, sat at his kitchen table and watched spring light fade to evening blue. Tomorrow, he'd fight systems that still didn't want to be fought. Tonight, he'd rest in the certainty that some victories were too important to need witnesses. The baby was safe, the system was changing, and Noel ardent, rejected, non-essential, too aware for comfort, had learned that the opposite of belonging wasn't loneliness. It was finding the exact place where your defects became someone else's necessity. He'd found that place, and he wasn't letting go. The end.